Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, loin streamer, and today we are doing LMIAY. It is you guys' time to shine. I don't have an editor when I talk, so if my grammar sucks, that's just because I don't think fast enough or clean enough. Before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, number one way is like what we're doing today with the with LMIAY, where I give you guys a prompt, you guys write a story, or if you have a story that fits the prompt, submit it, they're read on this channel, bask in your glory, and if you have a place that you would like to send readers who enjoy your content, they will be linked down in the description below. Number second way, it's going to be one of those days. The Fresh Meat feature, where if you are an indie author and you have a book published or going to be published in the near future, submit your first chapter here. I will read it on the channel. Hopefully, the algorithm will grab at that book chapter, send it to potential readers, and potential readers will go and grab your book to finish the rest of the story. Number three, if you would like to check out any of my books for enjoyment or roasting, they're available at any of your favorite retailers or at your library, or you can email me and I will send you where to get a free copy. Just promise that you'll talk about it. I don't care what you say. Just say something. And join us on this channel for the 2 live events every week, almost every week usually, where we've got Tuesday is the Thirst Yakuza stream. We will assign you a lover. Join us. No, nobody that's taken though. So the longer you wait, the fewer options there are. And then Friday nights is the loin stream, where we read indie or infamous books on this channel together, have opinions, dramatize, and really just go through the journey together. So check that out. Your only chance to see that is live, because it's a community. We really do have a fantastic community over here, of varying degrees. But I do want to take a second, because this day is a day about you guys. This video is about you guys, that I do want to say you all are so wonderful in your own way. So with that said, let's jump into the stories, starting with what was the prompt. So the prompt for November was a story that involves a special object made of glass. What was the reason for this? Nothing in particular. I think I just picked something that felt like mildly fairy tale-esque, because I was thinking of Cinderella's glass slipper at the time, and I wanted to see how you guys would interpret that. So yeah, let's go into the stories. The first is, I think, by our very own Daddy of the Hole, Mike Vanhoose. If Mike Vanhoose is not the Daddy of the Hole, I'm sorry, Mike. The sun's first rays warmed me through the tiny 4-inch glass window. It was nice. Vitamin D therapy early in the morning always lifted my spirits. I loved seeing the sun rise outside my little perch. I ate breakfast and waited for the day to evolve from my chair. Just inside the window, I watched 3 deer, a doe, and 2 fawns play. I've seen them before. They visited me every morning. The pair of twins flopped and jumped in the dew-covered grass until they were lost from my limited field of vision. The doe kept a watchful eye on the twins as she looked about her field of clover for something sweet. Losing them for the day saddened me, but I knew their routine. It was time for them to move on. Reflecting on my days as a younger man, I was ashamed of some of the things that I'd done, proud of others. It was probably the same with most men. All I could ask was that my family remembered me fondly when I left. That didn't seem like such a big thing to ask. Pressing my face closer to the glass, I could feel the sun's love casting itself down from the heavens and into my life. It felt glorious. I sat there, swathed through with the inner peace I was given by whatever creator was watching. It was a singular moment when all was right with my world. Today would be a good day. Crawford, you have a big day today. You ready? Gleason, the little guy with sweaty hands and a quickly receding hairline, spoke as he passed me. He was one of the people who worked here, not one I cared for. I could taste his sarcasm. Still, I could not let him ruin the day for me. It was my day, and it started out just fine. I thought to myself as I continued staring out my window, "Not today, asshole. Not today." He grunted and passed by. He grunted and passed me by. Lunchtime. I had hamburgers, fries, and Coke. I looked out my window, my 4-inch glass window, hoping to see some movement. Nothing usually stirred during the mid part of the day, but still I watched. My curiosity was rewarded with a bright red fox scurrying across the field outside. He looked like he was carrying a rabbit or squirrel. He was having his lunch, as I was having mine. I toasted Brother Fox with a lukewarm cup of Coke. The fox never looked at me, but that was okay. He was busy doing foxy things. I watched him sneak out of the field where the deer played this morning. Not long after, my mother and brother came in. They couldn't stay long, only an hour. That was okay. My brother Paul talked about his granddaughter and her soccer matches. Mom cried a lot, but that's to be expected. She told me about some bad news the administration had given her. I understood and cried with her. I asked if they could stay for dinner, but was told no. I ordered a pizza and wings. I asked for extra, just in case. An hour was all the time they had. I understood. As they were leaving, Paul extended his hand. The thought occurred to me that we'd never shook hands before, not as men. It felt good. I wanted to do more. A hug felt appropriate, but as men, we opted to stay at arm's length. Sometimes the male ego can wreck a special moment. Mom hugged me tight. Felt something leave her. Hope, maybe? I suppose a little of herself died as she left. She whispered in my ear as Paul led her away, crying, "I love you, my son." "I love you too, Mom." I sat in my room, staring across the field. The tiny 4-inch glass window showed only a small sliver of sunlight. The evening sky didn't shine in the field. Treetops, buildings, and clouds blocked its rays for the last few hours of the day. The joy of the first morning light was usurped by the gloominess of early evening. It was a sad time, looking through my window. My pizza came. I was starving but couldn't eat. Too much was on my mind. The order was messed up anyway. Instead of a meat lovers, I got a school bus with pepperoni. The wings were chicken nuggets. My former pastor visited me as well. I hadn't seen him in years. He looked older. White hair and liver spots replaced the pompadour and bronze skin I remembered from childhood. It was good to see him. We talked about several things, none of which involved God. That made me happy. I never wanted to insult someone of faith. I don't consider myself religious. Spiritual, maybe, but not religious. As he stood to leave, he took my hand and asked if there was anything that I needed to confess before he left. "No, thank you," I said. My tiny 4-inch glass window glowed at night from the overhead lights. The field was illuminated with artificial rays thrown down from the cold LED fixtures 80 feet above. Nothing stirred in my field, except the glint of the razor wire fence. It was the saddest time. I heard the footsteps getting closer, stopping at my door. 5 guys, most of which I'd known for years, stood just outside. "Hello, Jack," an older gentleman said. "Hello, Warden. Is it time?" I asked, knowing the answer. "Afraid so. Are you ready?" The voice was kind. I thought he was a good man, doing a tough job. That part had to be the worst of it. I nodded. There was nothing left to do. I stood and let them lead me away as he began reading the death warrant. "James Robert Crawford, you have been sentenced to death for murder in the 1st degree. His voice faded as I looked through the tiny 4-inch glass window for the last time. Oof. Oof, those give me chills. I feel like I knew this was going to be a death penalty thing, like almost immediately. I mean, I caught on that he was in jail. First I thought it was maybe a hospital, but then it was jail. But having read G.J. Schaefer's book especially, I caught on, and I actually, as I was reading this, I was like, you know what would be very interesting is a collection of short stories from different, well, not a collection, an anthology of short stories from different authors writing a character on death row at different phases of death row, because you're not on death row only when you're getting the death penalty or the day of the death penalty. I think that'd be a really interesting way to see the different approaches and perspectives that people have for the characters that they would put in that situation. But this was a really that said, obviously I'm sitting here inspired to like do an anthology and be like, hey guys, who wants to write a story that's like this? And pending, I may attempt to actually collect submissions for that someday, because I really think that would be a super interesting collection. But that said, Mike, you've obviously inspired me. This was a really cool experience. The next story is by Allison Miller. When I came back, he explained that it was energy siphoned from me and my memories. So it's negative energy. Yep. So hippie-like, right? How do you remember this? I thought the age regression machine erased memories, I said, jiggling Danielle on the hip. I stopped at 45. The professor kept going. I was in my 40s and the 50s. He went through until he was 18 again. God, I hated him at 18. I thought being straightforward with the mayor was the best idea, so I asked bluntly, "What is your story? Why are you here, and what made you stop going through, and what made you go through to begin with?" I identify with you when it comes to a father's insistence on his children living the way he does. You and I both challenged our fathers through our recalcitrance. I remember accurately the exact moment when I fell in here. It is so fresh in my mind, almost the only memory clear and crisp. I was 12. It was my birthday, 9:30 at night, December 6th, 1919, in New York City. 2 floors down was a girl, a suffragette. I invited her up for my birthday party. My father saw her, votes for women, sash, and went into his room to drink. When the strong-willed child refused to take the sash off, my father took a candle off my birthday cake and set our shitty tenement on fire. Almost all meals were cooked with grease back then, and almost all paint and furniture were hyper-flammable. I tried to put the fire out, and he pushed me over a chair, causing it to break. I thought of the broken bones, the welts and the bruises and the burn marks he had inflicted on me over the years, and I grabbed the leg of that broken chair and wailed on his face until the wood broke even. Digging his fingers into his thumb, he continued. The fire was out of control by then. I grabbed Lily and my mother and ran out the door and downstairs. Looking away for a moment, he directed me to sit Danielle down where he stood while I was in the box. Looking at me, he said, "Once you were to the door, he called for my mother's name. Like an idiot, she turned around and said that if she went back upstairs with him, she wouldn't get shot. People were moving past us now, concerned with saving their own lives. He pulled the trigger and I stepped in front of my mother. The scene dissolved around me, just as the bullet was an inch away from my chest. Mother Lily and I found ourselves in a field. It was daytime, and a man came up, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, 'Ah, Jason, we have a perfect place for you.' Why did you keep going through? I was 92 when I first went through. The professor went through because he was told he was dying. I went through because I wanted to get back to a time when I still had teeth and control of my bodily functions. I thought Alzheimer's was bad. This is worse. Get back in. That's enough getting to know you for one day." He sat Danielle down with a cloth doll to play with while I strapped in again. I closed my eyes again and flipped the blue switch. I felt happier now that I understood a little more about the mayor. To be honest, I had been better since I was taking care of Danielle full time. She was always around beforehand. When I opened my eyes, I saw many stages of my life with Sasha. In front of me was me holding her as a baby. I took 2 weeks off to be there to help Avery with her. To my left was a similar experience I've had with Danielle, and to my right was something I didn't recognize. Sasha was in a school uniform, braces in her mouth, and she was taller, starting to get a woman's face and shape. We were talking. Hal was just a few feet away with Stacy. I handed her a wristband like the mayor wears, and she took it, walking away without saying thanks. Okay, that's enough for today. I got out of the box, Danielle coming to greet me. I picked her up and looked at the energy swirling in the new tube. It was a dark blue with far more detail than before. It was like a galaxy in a jar, I said, sounding really stupid. The mayor smiled. The first and only smile I'd seen him give that wasn't a smug and condescending smile. The forced one that he put on for the public, or his politician's smile. It was a slight twitch to the right side of his mouth, but by far the only time of genuine happiness I'd seen. I knew that you'd come in handy one day. I was too problematic like you. I didn't want to be here. Lily left her family behind. She didn't get to see women get the right to vote, and my mother committed suicide 3 years after coming here. I'm sorry to hear that. I used it to propel me to do better. It helped me build the shop. Don't be afraid of this machine, Braxley. It's not as dark as it seems. Why is it black outside in that square? That's just the energy the machine gives off. Turning to me, glass vial in hand, he said, Peter Pan was full of shit. Happy thoughts aren't the only things that make you fly. I knew the moral of Peter Pan saying happy thoughts and fairy dust makes you fly was something along the lines of being happy makes you feel like you can fly. But what did the mayor mean? Letting go of anger and putting it into tubes sets you free? One, I really like that ending, but specifically, I really like happy thoughts aren't the only things that make you fly. This makes me feel like I want more of this story because I want to see more of where this goes with these people. Like, it feels partially like a prologue, but there's such a power in one. I like that this referenced Peter Pan, since the idea initially for the prompt was fairy tale, but I also like that's where it ends on. That is the perfect line to end this on, Allison. Or the perfect thought to end this on, really. The next story is by Mae Tanner. Valen opened his rabbit's pen. Hey, Wheezy. The rabbit lay in the opening of her bed box. He knelt beside her and stroked her head with a finger. For the first time since he'd rescued her from a snake, she didn't respond to his touch. He frowned. Wheezy, you okay? He picked her up. She was stiff and cold. He swallowed, fighting back tears. Rabbits don't live long. Maybe a couple of years. I had Wheezy for 7. It's time to say goodbye. He set the rabbit's body back in the bedbox. The ground was too hard to dig a grave and bury her. He'd have to find a way to store her body until spring. His chin trembled. I don't want to say goodbye. He left the pen and wandered out of the closure to the riverbank. The water was frozen solid. He came to the bridge. Should he cross or continue walking onto the side? He glanced up and down the river, bit his lip, and crossed. His great-aunt, Casey, was the only surviving member of her generation on her grandfather's side of the family. The servant escorted Volan into the family sitting room. Casey DeSole relaxed on a cushioned lounging chair, stroking a huge, fluffy orange cat. She smiled at him. Welcome. I don't get many visitors. Volan sat across from her. I wanted to spend time with someone I don't get to see much. She raised a brow. Trouble at home? Not really. I just lost my pet rabbit. She died sometime last night. I'd had her since I was a kid. Ah, I've lost many pets over my life. They never seem to live long enough, do they? She nuzzled the cat's nose. Not even Urfrin live long enough, and they live almost as long as people. Tell me about your rabbit. Volan smiled at her. I saved her from a snake when she was little. Her name was Wheezy. I called her that because she had trouble breathing at first. The healer said the snake cracked her ribs. At noon, Volan returned home to eat. His mother glanced up from her place at the table. You're home? I thought that you went with your Vada. He shook his head. Where's Pa gone? He had a wedding to perform. They'll feed him there. She glanced toward the kitchen. You'll have to fetch your own dishes. I didn't set out a place for you at the table. It's a good thing that I had plenty of soup. It's okay, he traipsed into the kitchen and collected what he needed from the cupboard. Coronas offered him a half sandwich. Muda didn't make enough sandwiches. Volan smiled at his little brother. Thanks. What happened to Wheezy? She died. Why'd she die? Volan shrugged. She was an old rabbit. Coronas glanced at Sadra. I told Muddy. She made me throw Wheezy in garbage bin for Faden. Volan slammed his hand on the table. I wanted to bury her. He jumped up and stormed out of the house. The garbage bin was empty. Shreds and barrels full of broken things surrounded Faden's home. The buildings formed a square with a yard in the center. Volan edged his way between the buildings to the yard. Faden tended to a furnace on one side. Faden, there was a rabbit in the bin when you picked it up from the home. What did you do with it? The radkin pointed at the furnace. I's burning it. That was my pet. I wanted to bury her. Her body was supposed to be in the bin. Her body wasn't supposed to be in the bin. Faden shrugged. You can bury the ashes. Lots of folks burn the dead. He smiled, exposing his tusks. I makes you a nice box to hold the ashes in. Volan smiled back at him. Thanks. Faden pointed at the table and benches in the center of the yard. Why don't you take seat? It's going to be a bit till the ashes are ready for you. Ashes for the better and having the raw body effing. You got to wait till spring to bury your pets. Some folk keep ashes in box at shelf for memento. He collected materials and sat beside Volan. What you want the box to look like? Can you make it so it's shaped like a rabbit? I'll see what I can do. Faden furrowed his brow as he sorted through the items that he'd brought to the table. He examined a cracked glass tumbler. Huh. Volan stared, wide-eyed, as Phelan leapt to his feet and burst into action. The Radkin junkman pulled a tray out of the furnace and set it aside. He tossed glass chips into the crucible and built up the fire. The glass chips melted, and Phaedon spun them with tongs. Ashes from the tray turned into molten glass an opaque gray. Before Volan's eyes, Phaedon turned the amorphous mass into a rabbit-shaped container. What a story, one of loss and building a rabbit-shaped glass guy. You accomplished a lot in such a short amount of time. Hitting with strong emotions at the beginning, also just the sheer number of characters in such a short period. And this isn't a magical item, but there's something mystical feeling about a bunny-shaped coffin made of glass, basically. Very nice, Mae. The next story is by Sean P. It'll never work, they said. You'll end up a vacuum-packed popsicle, they said. Well, they may be right, he mused, to no one in particular. Of all the regrets in his life, and of course there were many, this view was not one of them. The glass pilot chair and the broken-off glass flight yoke that he was now holding, those were some quality regrets. He stood and looked around, assessing his situation. He was sitting in a prototype all-glass spaceship in a high orbit of an uninhabited planet. Glancing over the display panels, which, indeed, were not made of all glass, reassured him. Hull integrity was holding, oxygen levels were steady, and he had plenty of fuel regardless of the positives. Not having a way to steer the ship was a definite problem. Hey, dumbass, you okay? A voice crackled over the radio. Ugh, he mumbled underneath his breath, reaching over to press the send button. Yeah, much to your chagrin, I see. Cut it out. Give me a systems readout when you're ready. Why? Can't you see the telemetry there? Besides, I have a bigger problem at the moment. Yeah, of course. I like to hear you say it all. Not today, he said. My yoke busted off and I'm trying to figure out what to do about it. Did you not expect the lateral stress on the control interface? The voice on the radio chuckled. I don't know why you couldn't use a joystick like everybody else. Guess I should have built this out of aluminum, right? Guess I should have built this out of aluminum, right? Should have grabbed a couple of thrusters and a fuel pod from the shelf also. Hell, I should have bought a ship at the docks and saved myself the trouble. Don't get so defensive, you know I'm messing with ya. Sorry, I'm a little preoccupied at the moment. Nothing to worry about, turn around. He furrowed his brow, then spun around on his heel. Through the thick glass hole, he saw a small ship pulling alongside him. The pilot was waving and flashing the external lights to greet him. I suppose you're here to rescue me, he said. I don't know if I want it. How am I ever going to get anywhere if you have to keep coming to my rescue? He saw the other pilot bring a microphone up to his face. That's what friends are for. Besides, you need someone to knock you off of your high horse so that you'll keep improving. Come on. I'll bring you back to the station. Thanks, he said, with a hint of defeat in his voice. I'll never get it right. He sat back in his uncomfortable pilot's chair and strapped in. The straps weren't made of glass, which brought him some measure of comfort. Still, this flight yoke problem posed a major problem. It's not like he opposed using other materials besides glass, but it was antithetical to the goal. There was a rough jostle when the two ships mated. He looked over at the airlock and saw mooring clamps extend into the pockets. He slapped the send button on the radio. Be careful, you doofus. My ship is glass. Oh, sorry about that. The radio chirped back. Must have forgotten. But it was too late. He cringed at the first low cracking sound started emanating from the airlock. He looked over from his buckled-in position and saw a small spider crack forming. You better hurry up and get that airlock mated, he said into the mic. What happened? The voice chimed. Something malfunctioning? You could say that. Let's try and speed it up, and no more clamping. What we got is what we got. He apprehensively watched the cracks work their way outward in several directions. No gas was leaking yet, but he could start any time. Relief poured over him as he heard the airlock passage purge. Finally, he said, unbuckling his harness and floating up. He grabbed hold of the chair and flung himself toward the airlock. As soon as he put his hand on the wheel to open the door, the unthinkable happened. Brosif, you were asking for trouble with this glass spaceship. Also, your buddy probably should have, brought the gentle touch to this situation. Because, yeah, it sounds like he just went, and then, yeah, sorry, your buddy kind of helped you, but then fails you. Hopefully, even though the unthinkable happened, you still got to the other side. I'm hoping. What a scary situation. It also makes me think of in The Eye of the Universe, when the narrator got to that big social area that was kind of like a mall, and there was just like the whole wall was made of glass, a giant glass window where it made it feel like you were just floating out in space. And that's a really cool idea, but also scary as frick, and I wouldn't do it because I'm a pansy, as you all know. The next story is by Egao Chan. So, this first mission too? Sitting at the back of the car, the shy girl wearing a pair of glasses with a pink frame asked Lena. Miss Kaufman. Please, Riley. Call me Lena. Lena smiled at the young girl. Yes, I am also new to the brands. Don't worry. This is a simple mission. Something to introduce you to our work and what kind of threats we as a brand deal with. And maybe after this, you can decide to join us officially. Agent Powell chuckled as he parked in the corner around half a block away from their destination. Of course, this is also a chance to practice your powers. Oh, a haunted house? Riley became visibly excited at the rusty metal gate. This is a rather small lot. Why the fences? Lena frowned at the metal fences with a barbed wire at the top and were taller than everyone present. This is what, 2 bedrooms at most? Not to worry. Agent Powell just moved his right-hand fingers, and a small metal key appeared. He pushed the key in, twisted it a few times before the lock just opened with a click. The inside of the house showed 2 stories, stairs, a spacious main hall with a chandelier hanging from the dome. The smell of mold and stale wood lingered in the air. The first thing they saw was a slender humanoid creature made of countless dark particles with something shiny on its forehead, creeping right below the chandelier, chewing on a severed deer head. That should be it. Agent Powell looked around, more nervous than he should be. Let's be careful. Something wrong? Lena asked. Not sure. I don't remember any reports about this place. This kind of spatial presences, they should have been registered with the brands. Agent Powell was cut off by a low growl from the creature. It seemed to the 3 strangers in this mansion, revealing the shiny object occupying most of its face, a blurry, translucent ball, flashing with a 3-dimensional eye pattern inside. Shit. Bang! The creature lunged right at them. Before it could reach halfway, the shiny eye was struck by Lena's bullet. Its body cracked and exploded into tiny shards like a shattered glass piece. We need to go. Agent Powell conjured 2 swords in both of his hands and tried to lead the 2 potentially new recruits out through the door through which they came. But the door was no longer there. Behind them was only a long hallway leading to a small room with a still burning fireplace. More similar creatures appeared from different corners around them, all different in sizes but similar in color. One even had 2 additional arms on its back. Shit. Agent Powell looked around once more. Prepare to fight. Looks like we need to find a way out of here. The creatures, with their giant, single, shining eyes staring at the 3 humans, growled and barked as they lunged at them like animals. Lena pulled out her second gun and started firing from both her hands. Her bullets anticipated the movements of the creatures, and some even curved in the air, striking at least 3 creatures in their eyes and shattering them. Fall back! Agent Powell swung his 2 swords, slicing through 2 creatures and clearing the space around them. He then pulled Riley with him to the hallway, then called out to Lena. Kaufman, here! Lena fired 2 additional shots before she followed up on Agent Powell and Riley. The hallway was empty, and the air became warmer the closer they got to the fireplace. Somehow, the creatures just stopped chasing them, but simply growled at the entrance. The moment they went into the room at the end of the hall, 2 bigger creatures rushed out from the side and slammed Agent Powell into the wall. Their mouths opened wide and were ready to bite into the agent's body. And then they banged. Riley immediately stared at the 2 creatures and muttered. And then they banged. Riley immediately stared, and the 2 creatures muttered. The creatures let go of injured Agent Powell and started wrestling on the ground, trying to mount each other. Lena fired all of the rest of her bullets in her guns and shattered them. Lena pulled the now pale and trembling Riley into her and exhaled in relief, but a cough came behind her. It was an old man with an abnormally big head and a hunched back. On the upper part of the old man's face embedded a spherical glass eye. His eyes, flesh, nose, and mouth shriveled and were pushed to the side. Lena tried to reload her gun, but her entire body was paralyzed under the glass eye's gaze. Bit by bit, her mind was drawn to the eye. She could not resist at all. Boom! The shadow figure crashed through the ceiling and landed at the old man. The gaze broke. Lena fell back onto the ground with Riley in her arms. The old man shattered like porcelain doll under the perky assets wrapped in latex. Yowza! Ouch, ouch, ouch! The figure jumped up, holding his butt in his hands in latex gloves. Bad landing, bad landing! Lena bit her own tongue to clear her mind. Then she slammed the magazine into her gun and fired off half of it while the man's butt was facing her. An eardrum-splitting scream exploded as the glass eye clenched between the man's cheeks shattered. Everything around cracked and crumbled. Lena, Riley, and Agent Powell were thrown into the ground covered in dried grass. When they looked around, the mansion was gone, and the small house was completely collapsed. Was that... Agent Powell stood up with his hands extended to Lena and Riley, while his eyes were fixated on the man in a full-body latex suit lying face down on the ground with his rear sticking up. It's him. Lena grunted as she stood up with the help of Agent Powell's pull. I'm sure of it. This is the origin. So, some level of origin. They're finally hunting the Gimp Man. They're going to demask the Gimp Man, and he's going to have, like, no face underneath the mask, I swear. You are an interesting guy, Egao. What can I say? I do look forward to your thoughts, though. The next story is by Semantic Dragon. Lily exhaled deeply as she stepped through the double doors into the grand gallery. As a model, she was used to being invited to decadent, high-class parties in big, expensive houses, to being given private tours for the cost of a bit of affection. But this place was different. This place belonged to Henry Lasang, and in the gallery hung his art. His paintings had become renowned overnight, captivated the art world with the dark, brooding portraits of impressionistic landscapes and abstract murals. Henry had been prolific despite being nearly 40, with over 50 art pieces in his first year, 100 in a second, and a steady churning for the next dozen. And there he stood, surrounded not by his famed pieces, which all had seen at some point or another, but his private collection, pictures he painted just for him and for people he thought were special. Wow, She wasn't sure. One was taller than her, looming over them as they moved into the cavernous room, an image of great pillars of bones supporting a flesh roof over a floor of scarred skin, as beautiful as it was horrifying. Another stood opposite, the most gorgeous garden she'd ever seen, yet it filled her with unease as her eyes found patterns in the leaves and skulls and snarling beasts. It's really interesting, she lied as she smiled. Ah, yes. I don't think there's a market for it, sadly. He led her toward the back, where an easel stood, bearing a great blank piece. A step stood to its side, and a table with his tools. I want to show you something. Henry smiled as he picked up a small box from the table. A gift? Lily asked as she held her hands out for the box. Just showing, not giving, he said, popping the lid up and back to reveal a slender glass brush. Lily stared, confused by what he was presenting to her. What good, after all, was a paintbrush made of glass? Did you make it? No, it was a gift. It's special. He turned the box around in his hands and plucked it gently from the velvet cushion. Reminds me what art can be. Making something because you can. Is that what it's about? She smiled and stepped a bit closer, thrusting her breasts toward him as she gazed up at his eyes. Is that what inspires you? What if I told you it was compulsion, not inspiration, that made me paint? He asked as he slid an arm around her shoulders, pulling her in against his strong chest. His eyes never left the shining glass brush that he twirled in his fingers, flickering in the light. Compulsion. What compels you, then? She asked, easing against him willfully. He turned his head to look down at her dark blue eyes, detached and distant, and she stiffened slightly as a slow smile spread over his lips. The brush. She felt a sting in the side of her throat. The bristles of polished glass dug into her jugular as he gripped it, holding on to her tightly as she tried to pull away, but found her limbs unresponsive. He dragged her to a chair and set her limp body onto it in an almost a professional manner. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, but stare in abject horror as he lifted the blood-red glass paintbrush from against her neck. He wheeled her back to the canvas, letting her watch as he slashed through the air and dappled the blank fabric with splotches of crimson. He pulled at the globs of viscous fluid with the crystalline bristles, and it spread like any ordinary brush. Bit by bit, he started to fill it with an image, returning to stab her whenever the reservoir went low. She watched as the art blossomed before her. Eventually, the neck would not serve, and he took a moment to find a knife to cut her dress away. She tried to struggle one last time, but even if she'd been able to move, she was weak. With a last stroke of her cheek, he stabbed upward beneath the sternum. The brush slid through with unnatural ease and found her heart. She whimpered the last bit that she could muster and gasped as the light began to fade. The final hour, though, was not death for Lily. A fleeting terror had passed through her mind as she faded, a single tear streaking down her face, as she realized with regret that she would not see the finished piece that he painted with her blood. That's such an interesting thing to specifically end on, with her own obsession of beauty and art that kind of paints an obsession and focus that she also has on art, that she's not thinking about her death, but the regrets that she has as her death comes because of this, because she won't get to see the art made with her body. This also immediately made me think of the first Layers of Fear game, if you've ever played it. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend that you do, because that is about a painter in a house, creepy, and there are actually multiple endings depending on some of the directions that you go and some of the choices that you make. You reveal different things about this painter's life and his own delusion and his own insanity that kind of develops and shows itself more as the story goes forward. And you collect the different parts of what he used to paint, to make his paintings. And you've got stuff like human hair for the bristles and bone for the handle, and you see kind of the insanity that he went through for all of this. So if you haven't played that, I highly recommend it. That's what this made me think of, and I loved the atmosphere in this piece. You got an uneasiness all the way from the beginning. The next story is by J Koostachin. I have something to give you. A woman in black, handing him a strange object. He glanced at the woman with ink-black eyes. She was beautiful and mysterious, but also terrifying. He didn't know her name or where she came from, nor did he care for either one as long as she gave him what he wanted. You must take it now before I change my mind. Okay, Merrick responded. The woman took his hand and placed the object into his palm. A glass-like metal object, ice-cold to the touch. He licked his teeth, as its humming gave his mouth a weird taste. His heart began beating faster than normal, his pulse throbbing against his chest. This will keep you safe, she whispered. It's your only hope, so don't let me down. Her voice echoed throughout the room, making everything seem darker even though there was no lights on. The woman turned around, leaving Merrick alone in this place. Merrick looked around. Where the heck did she go? He thought to himself. As if she heard him thinking about her, the door opened again, revealing nothing more than darkness beyond. Then, all of a sudden, a light appeared and illuminated the entire room. The first thing he saw was a large table covered with papers scattered everywhere. Most of them are blank sheets. The sound of ravens cawing somewhere. Oh shit, he muttered. Please don't let it be the Bigfoot mimicking one of those birds. He walked over the desk and picked up some paper, reading through them. Written in pictographs and strange hieroglyphics, he grabbed his phone and snapped pictures of it. He gathered every scrap of paper he could find and put them in the phone's photo gallery. He stuffed them in his backpack. What is going on? Why am I here? He asked himself aloud. His muscles seized. Another cawing from somewhere, much closer than he liked. A slab of thick ice slid upward his back. Oh no. Bionic Raven. A loud thud, followed by cracking noises, could be heard. Merrick quickly ran out the house, the sounds following close behind. His backpack bounced against his back as he ran across the dirt pathway. The Raven cawed loudly. Come on, come on! In front of him stood a huge beast-like creature. It had 5 legs, 2 spindled arms, and a head that resembled a bird. Its wings stretched far above its body, but instead of feathers, they were covered with a layer of frosty white skin. The creature's face was covered in sharp spines that protruded from its skull. It launched at him. Merrick sidestepped. He gagged at the stench of its body odor. His eyes watered, and he turned and ran. Sticking close to the trees, he couldn't shake off the creature. It punched a thick pine tree down the road, causing it to fall into the ground. Merrick slipped and fell on his back. Another call. Move, stupid! The gruesome thing's insect-like foot came slamming down. He moved out of narrowly being crushed. He got up and ran again. Another thud sounded, Merrick's lungs burning as he gasped for air. His vision blurred. His feet pounded hard on the earth beneath him. He tripped and fell forward, landing flat on his stomach. It came sailing toward him like an evil gymnast. He moved out of the way. Again, glass-like metallic object glowed as the creature launched at him again. It bounced off of him. His feet pounded the ground. His hands held tight to the sides of his backpack. He hefted one of the 4 legs, leaning against the tree. He swung it, striking it in its head. It screeched. He grabbed a large rock and seized its head and started swinging at it like a drunken ballerina. The creature shrieked. He fumbled for another log, launching himself in the air, delivering a fatal blow. Not today. I'm no one's takeout. Merrick coughed. The creature laid, sprawled, dead. Merrick climbed to his knees and wiped the blood from his nose. Shit. I can't believe I just killed a fucking monster, he said, breathing heavily. Well, so long and farewell. The Raven swooped down and vomited on the rank corpse. It caught on fire. His eyes started to water again. He covered his mouth, gagging and wheezing. The Raven manifested itself as the young woman he met earlier, but his eyes widened at her nakedness. He let out a comical, high-pitched cry. Oh! She glared at him. Don't say anything, she ordered. But, shut up, she snarled. Merrick shut his mouth, looking away. How do you feel? She asked. Fine. Good. She smiled. Her eyes were redder than her nose. She smelled sweet like vanilla. I need you to take this. She handed him a small vial. Why? Because you're going to die soon, she replied. What? He raised his voice in shock. I order you to drink the damn thing, she yelled. Okay, you're the boss. Merrick gulped down the contents of the vial. The world went black. A flash of light shot through his eyes, and he heard a loud bang. Then everything became silent. He awoke to find himself sitting in a cabin, sitting on a bed with a blanket wrapped around him. What? How long have I been asleep? About 3 hours. 3 hours? That's not very long. Yes, it is. Whatever, he mumbled. So, how are you feeling? All right, I guess. That's great, because we still have a lot of work ahead of us. She sat on the chair beside his bed. First things first, you'll be staying here until you recover. Really? Yep, you've been poisoned. Poisoned? By who? Just rest and shut up, she snapped. Also, I want you to stay away from the forest. Why? Because it's dangerous. Dangerous to whom? To everyone else. You're different. Barry, you make me think of Modelland, and I mean that in the nicest way, because I love the absurdity and like the entrance of Eldritch in Modelland, and I get that with like the creatures that you're making and the surprise and like I'm interrupting my own thoughts trying to figure out how I want to say this, because I like being surprised by crazy monsters, and I feel like there's a mythology being built here from your perspective, where you've got this crazy monster and this guy being pulled in. Like, this stuff is always so surprising, which is why I like it. It's also one of the reasons why I kind of really like horror, not specifically slasher horror, but because people will insert like crazy monsters that you don't see anywhere else, and you're always surprised when it's by what's included in the creative stuff, if you know what I mean. I don't think I'm helping myself other than to say I like just how surprising this story is, and the creation of the beasties in there. I want to know more about this world and what's going on and what you're building. Very, very interesting. The next story is by KawaiiGroovycat, which I feel like this is the first time that you've submitted, so thank you for submitting to LMIAY. When the cuts and scratches on his hands were still fresh, Sander held the only surviving member of his pack of glass dogs, a German Shepherd, and learned about the fragility of life. He had almost immediately tried to piece together the rest of them, but the only thing that he had succeeded in was making a mess of blood and gorilla glue. It wasn't as though he had ever stood a chance anyway. Once something is broken, it can never be pieced together in quite the same way again. But thanks to first aid, the cuts on his hand eventually turned to scars, and the scars faded with time. Out of sight, out of mind. At least, that's what Sander told himself. Despite having been born to an engineer and a chemist, Sander realized early on that his true calling would be writing mystery novels. He was perfect. His writing was perfect, and he knew that this was what he was made for. Science had never been his forte. But there was one lesson that he had retained from his upbringing. Everything can be explained if you work on it long enough. He would never claim to know the answer to everything. He wasn't that full of himself, but he firmly believed that answers were out there. That mindset was what followed him to survive in the hellscape that was public school. It had also enabled him to ruminate on the mystery that had been plaguing him for 2 years now. The dogs had lived on the top shelf in his bookcase for 5 idyllic years before falling to their shattering doom. They'd been a gift from his mother, along with a note that read, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, you are my legacy." And of course, she had been right. Sander was perfect, because his mother had been perfect. His mother had been perfect, and that's why she ended things the way that she did and left him with the dogs, almost like she was leaving herself behind in a form even better suited to care for him. At least, that's what Sander had told himself. When they broke, his father had told him that accidents happen. But Sander's favorite word had always been why. It was what he could never stop asking himself, even late at night, when he had school early the next morning, so naturally he searched for the answer that would quiet his mind. He first ruled out earthquake. All of the books on his shelves had remained where they were, and Sander surely would have noticed if any of them had been moved, even by 1 millimeter. But then, something sounded suspiciously like the truth began to fester in the back of his head, and it made him sick. Was the tragic accident really so accidental? He'd laughed the thought off the first time. His father knew better than to enter his room by this age, and the woman the old man was married to knew better than to try anything. Not that she had any reason to. On top of that, his little sister Miranda was not only too small, but also not spiteful enough to try anyway. Were she a little bit older? Maybe she would be. But she was 10 to Sander's 15, and children typically didn't reach the peak of prickliness until the age of 12. She still had a couple more years to just be Sander's cute little half-sister. The answers he had at the time were physically impossible, beyond incomprehensible, and nowhere near conceivable. What really happened? Sanders had asked the old German Shepherd one night, curled up on his bed. I wish you could tell me. To hold back the laughter that ensued, he clenched his teeth so hard his jaw started to hurt. That was unbearably pathetic. At least that's what anyone would say upon seeing how he was acting. If they didn't know any better, but deep down, Sanders' reaction was perfectly reasonable, because he was perfect. Then again, he continued, once the laughter welling up within him had died down, if you could, then what would be left for me to do? He had, of course, received no answer, and a part of him liked it that way. He wasn't so narcissistic as to believe that he was entitled to be given answers, but he knew that if he ever wanted the truth, he'd have to take it for himself. People, especially living ones, lied through their teeth all the time. Teenagers, in particular, were terrible about it. The boy Sander had considered his oldest friend had been no exception. He wouldn't exactly blame the boy for not wanting to use Sanders' perfection for his own personal benefit, but after he finally forgot the boy's name, Sander had decided that he preferred the company of inanimate objects and dead people. Unlike the living, they were both terrible at deceiving and keeping secrets. He himself had never seen the need to tell those sorts of lies. He was perfect, and perfect people had nothing to hide. But just how perfect was the rest of his family? It was impossible to know everything, but answers were always out there. Saunders found his Saunders had found his when he'd tucked his German Shepherd into his backpack and flew the nest for the clear skies that lay ahead. Saunders didn't consider himself to be an uncaring person, but he was terrible at keeping in touch with people. He couldn't help it. It was simply too easy to forget to reply to his texts or to answer calls when his phone was always on silent mode. He preferred simply to love people from a distance. It was less of a pain in the ass that way. Fewer things to remember. Even so, it wasn't as though he didn't try. He usually called his father at least once per week, and he tried to get back to Miranda any time he remembered to check his phone, regardless of the time of day. It worked for Saunders, at least, to step closer for a moment and then retreat in the next. It never failed to piss Miranda off, but Saunders thought nothing of it. Siblings got pissed at each other all the time, but ultimately it didn't add up to much of anything in the long run. Such was life, and Saunders never considered himself or Miranda to be the exceptions. Hell, their relationship was so good that one day, Miranda even sent him an actual physical envelope through the mail. Picking it up, however, left him uneasy at how wrong it looked. Despite knowing that it could have only been her who sent it, the envelope was unmarked. No return address for whatever reason, and only a stamp on the top corner. And whatever it contained didn't feel like paper to Saunders. When he opened the envelope, it seemed to speak to him, saying, "This is why." It was filled with jagged, translucent shards. And there's something really melancholy about this story that I really like the vibe of. I'm really interested in Saunders as a person, and I really like, there's like a mysticalness and a very casual magicalness of the way that he talks about how he is perfect and his mom was perfect and they're just perfect. And there feels like there's so much more to this. It's the casual, it's like the magical realism kind of thing that I like. And I'm like, I want to know more. I'm so drawn into this. And the German Shepherd. Also, not going to lie, at the very beginning, I was like, wait, is it saying that there was blood coming from the German Shepherd as the glass German Shepherd? Because I was assigning magical realism to this as well. And not just, oh, it's from his fingers getting all over that. But I love that imagery as well of it's from his mother. It's one of the few things left by his mother. Broken glass and blood. And kind of a symbol of the relationship as it's ended. Reading Between the Edges was the name of this piece. And I know that I'm missing things because I read in the way that I read. So I'm probably, obviously, reading into this in other ways that probably the author did not mean for me to read it in. But I did enjoy this, with especially the melancholy. Your character voice is beautiful. And so is the level of detail and the rhythm in your sentences. Really good. Thank you so much for submitting, KawaiiGroovycat. I appreciate you. The next story is by RSAlessi. So ready for it. Go in there and find me a glass object that's yay big. John held his hand 9 inches apart. And looks like a swan. Pay whatever she asks. Don't leave without it. Through the passenger side window, Xander stared at the curio shop a dozen yards up the street from where they'd parked. Of all the things I thought you'd ask me to do, shopping for home decor was not among them. And what was? John stretched out the driver's seat, looking comfortable in his flannel and blue jeans. I don't know. Fucked up demented stuff? A slight smile. Tomorrow I'll have you wash me socks. Xander wrinkled his nose. No chance. He hopped out of the car before John could come up with anything worse. Stores like this curio shop existed in every small town in America. Dusty, dimly lit, and empty of customers. Stacked floor to ceiling were items accumulated from estates and yard sales, auctions, and flea markets, all priced up to reflect the time spent curating this wasteland of discarded junk. Can I help you? Xander looked up from his collection of corncob pipes. The shop owner, an old lady, her skin heavily tanned, or perhaps she was biracial. He wasn't sure. Yeah, actually, I'm looking for, He gave her the description John gave him. She nodded. I have just the thing. They wound past mismatched end tables and grandmother clocks and tarnished silver platters. Every cabinet and bookshelf was stuffed full of chipped and worn knickknacks. By the time they reached the back of the shop, he was convinced the place must be a front for laundering money, because no way this lady earned enough to pay herself a living wage, let alone cover the rent. I wasn't expecting you so soon. I only put it out yesterday. Huh? He looked up from a rusty dagger he'd found on a plastic TV tray. The items in the back of the store were in even worse condition than the ones in the front. What do you mean? She chuckled. This what you were looking for? She gestured to a glass object that matched John's description. Maybe? He reached for it. She didn't stop him, so he picked it up. It didn't look like much, irregular in shape, and its thick glass full of bubbles encrusted with white scale. He turned the thing in his hand like he'd recognized a defect if he saw it. The neck was chipped at its opening. The swan body was whole, no cracks anywhere. He rubbed at the scaly white residue. Little vinegar will take that right off. He nodded. I'll give you $20 for it. She chortled. I don't think so. How much do you want? She took the glass swan from his hands. I want you to tell that coward to come in here and barter for his damn self. She slipped her arm through his and guided him to the front of the store. Go on. She gave him a little push toward the door. Don't worry. I won't sell it to anyone else. He hesitated. Are you sure that I can't? Yes. Margaret's a troublesome lass, John said when Xander relayed the message. He expected a violent outburst, some swearing at least, not a quiet resignation. Together, they returned to the shop. John, you haven't aged a day. The smile transformed Margaret's face, and Xander had a vision of beauty that she must have been in her youth. John cracked a smile. And here I've been pinning my hopes on aging into better looks. He wound an arm around her waist and pulled her to his hips. Look at you, beautiful as the day I first laid eyes on you. You flatter me. The blush on Margaret's cheeks said she enjoyed the attention. How's my grandma doing? Driven to distraction, John sighed. The kids won't stay out of trouble. They don't get that from my side. Aye, every bit and more is mine, but it don't make my Rosie's life any easier. Margaret lifted the glass swan from the nearby counter. This'll help. John reached for it, but she tucked it behind her back. You know what I want. John bit his lip and frowned. Xander, go wait in the car. 20 minutes passed before John stepped out of the shop, adjusting his shirt sleeves and running a hand through his disheveled hair. His cheeks were flushed when he settled into the driver's seat. Xander raised an eyebrow. You did not just get it on with a 90-year-old woman. John passed the glass swan to Xander and put the car in gear. Margaret is 73. That doesn't answer my question. I am under no obligation to answer your questions. Xander rotated the glass swan in his hands. What does this thing do? It's a barometer. What? A tool for measuring air pressure. Rise in pressure means good weather ahead. Fall in pressure, storm is brewing. You went on all of this trouble for something that you can look up on a weather app? No. Xander scowled and flipped the radio on. They rode home to the soundtrack of Megadeth, Queen, and Black Sabbath while he considered the obvious question. How would a barometer help John? Arriving back at the house, Xander feigned disinterest, a deception made too easy by his basketball game on TV, and he almost missed John sliding a strand of long, dark hair into the swan's neck before filling the contraption with water from the kitchen sink. Xander! He pulled himself off the sofa and wandered into the kitchen. The barometer rested elegantly on the kitchen counter. John gestured to a thick black line drawn around the barometer's neck. Call me if the water level ever drops below that line. You got it, boss. John eyed him suspiciously. What? No questions. None that you'll answer. John smiled. You can be trained. I love these two so much. I think it's also the part, like, Ruth, it's the domestic, it's like the mystical domestication and just the casual of two. I don't know. These characters have such great chemistry, but I also like the episodicness of the mystical items and John being like this old mystical creature that you're kind of just slowly learning as you're around. I freaking love these two. I love so much every week, every month, I should say, when I read a story, and it's just a continuation of these two and getting to see more into this world that's created around them. Like, I'm intrigued. I am with Xander, and Xander's just passing. We're all on Xander's tell me what's going on side, but it's in the compelling way of, John, what the frick are you involved in? Jonathan. I know that's probably not your real name, but still. Tell Thank you so much for submitting those, Ruth. Really, for real, though. The next story is by Fredrick Neri, the poorest, most destitute author of all time. Please buy The Winged Hussar with a special improved version of Diggin' on Amazon, or I'll starve to death. That is his message. And he writes, there once was a child who wasn't too bright. His mom drank nothing but paint thinner all day and night. His parents didn't love him, so his dad left to go get a light. Will he come back? It's been a month, but he still just might. He left behind a special vase, one made of glass, from which he used to smoke grass. So did his wife, because their parenting sucked ass. Mom went to buy more, but their bank didn't have enough mass. So that is why she sold him to the baby store, where they sell parts of babies galore. All chopped up into blood and gore, he went to baby heaven, where it was never a bore. All so Mom could skip her chores. Well, what a depressing number to come back on after finishing with Xander and John. But what would LMIAY be without a bunch of horror in it, I swear. Without a bunch of horror and murder. That seems to be the brand. Not that I mind when it's anywhere on the landing, if you know what I mean. Interesting choice, Fredrick. Interesting choice. Also nice rhyming. Nice meter as well. The final story of the month is by LogansGun. I've been traveling for what seemed like ages, and although I wished to continue on, fearing I'd never continue if I broke my stride, I found myself quite fatigued. The village I arrived in was unfamiliar to me. Its people were cheerful, eccentric, soft, almost exhaustingly so. I took to an alley to avoid the bustle, passing the window of quiet taverns, eateries, a tannery, and shops with queer trinkets. One storefront in particular amused me. I dare say, and I admit this as anyone who has walked the streets of Pompeii, the fertility statue indeed made me blush. "My children!" I heard the voice come from up an alley. The narrow streets curved ever so slightly to the east, so that I could see who uttered the words. Curious, I made haste and rushed along the uneven stone of the walkway. "Pardon me. Excuse me." I pushed through a small gathering of people, careful not to appear rude. I was, in fact, an outsider. Someone shouted angrily. I tipped my hat and apologized. The street widened, but unfortunately, I ran into a barrier of a dozen other puzzled passers-by. I tapped a man's shoulder and took in a breath. He pushed me away without ever looking. A foot or two away, a woman turned herself from the mysterious spectacle to shush me. I took offense to this, as I spoke no other words. Scant as my height might be, I had no trouble overcoming the tribulations of possessing such a small stature. I slid behind a row of onlookers and found a stack of crates. The wooden slats would certainly snap under the weight of a larger individual. However, I carefully placed my foot along the edges and balanced myself gracefully. From the looks of it, I had circled most of the village and arrived at the town square. Hundreds of spectacles watched, huddled closely, trying desperately to peer over and between the heads of those in front. In the center, where all the eyes were fixed, was a white-cloaked man. He stood stoically on a raised wooden platform. "Quiet!" he cried out. "We cannot commence until all other voices have been silenced. If you feel so tempted to speak, wave down an usher, and they will assist you." People around me removed something from their waist pouches, not dissimilar from the horse bridle. Others waved a hand, and cloaked figures distributed small objects. They placed them in their mouths and buckled the straps. It was completely silent. The man on the platform gave a satisfactory nod, then raised his hands, palms facing upward, as if to touch each other and every person in his congregation. "Those of you who have gathered here as witness to this great ceremony, remain standing. My most devout children, my most devoted children, you may assume a comfortable position on the ground." I had not noticed it before, but in front of the man was a large group of men and women in gray cloaks. They stood motionless in formation, like front-line soldiers, evenly spaced, waiting for their leader's command. The man lowered his arms, and his disciples fell to the ground. I was standing on the tip of my toes, trying for a better look. Some had chosen to go to their knees and place their foreheads in the sand. Others lie flat on their backs, with the bottom of their feet toward the sky. A Few lay on their sides, and one knee pressed into their chest. A few lay on their sides with one knee pressed into their chest. All ye who gather before me, the man started. All who seek to please and be pleased. My people, my children, aghast agape, with the neighboring gash or grapes, lips or prostate. However you choose to present yourself today, either intimate or prostrate, your gem shall shine brightly. The people before him threw up their cloaks, exposing their bare rear ends and genitalia. A few voices in the crowd gasped, as did I. Do not fret. The time of fasting is nearing its end. You have done well to cleanse your body of all that is foul and horrible and hateful. To bring about a more equal world, all must appreciate and accept the one thing as we people share. The organs that produce offspring only divide us. One gives, one takes. How can we be whole if our whole is not shared with the world? Only then shall we know peace. The man pulled from beneath his cloak a small, glistening, transparent object, tapered with a bulbous end, and held it high above his head. My children, I present to you this year's ceremonial gift. After the sun sets, gather your friends and pop the cork like you would a keg of wine. The man gestured the ushers. Please. The ushers went around to each exposed bottom, bowed, mumbled something I could not understand nor hear, and assisted in inserting the object. I would only assume many squirmed or found the act unpleasant, but I was already paying a shopkeeper for supplies. I made the decision to continue my course, braving the night and fighting sleep. I chose not to look back as I left town, and I swore I'd never return. Narrator. You may have just witnessed, almost witnessed, a death cult. Of sorts. But for real, Logan, the building of the atmosphere in this and the mystery and the suspense as the character approaches and then you see what is going on, very well done. To also act that it is so normal within the expectations of the people who are there. I mean, normal within the cult that's there, because obviously there were other gaspers in the audience that were like, what the frig are you doing? But the casualty in which it was built and then the way that the characters involved in this were acting, very nicely done in building this scene and letting it play out and then having your character respond around it after watching it. Very nicely done. These are also the kinds of things where you're like, when you're in the middle of a story and you're just reading it and stuff is happening and you're like, I don't know what I'm expecting. But as I said before, I like to read a story and then kind of just be surprised at where it goes. And I was 100% surprised here, so you guys are also insanely creative, and this is why I love LMIAY. I don't think there was a single entry this month that I was not blown away by just how unique the points of view are for everybody that submits to this. So thank you so much every month for making my entire month, really. With your guys' submissions, me getting to read your stories. And for everybody that just listened, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. What was your favorite story? Check out all of these creators and authors. Their links will be down in the description below if they gave them to me to share with you guys. Follow them. Embrace the awesomeness that is being created every day by the creative community around here. And especially let me know what your favorite story was this month, because I am interested. Also, check out the prompt for next month. It is currently available. Click the link tree down in the description below, and it will be the first button at the top. Maybe consider submitting if you haven't submitted yet. Could be a good time. Could be a disaster. With that said, thank you so much, everybody, for joining, for listening, for sticking it out all the way through this, and I appreciate you so much. Have a great Thanksgiving if this is the only video that you watch for this entire month. Since it is November, I'm giving gratitude right now. Don't worry, I'll be around all month. That doesn't mean that I'm disappearing, okay? Have a great week, and don't die. Hello, boomers! My name is Yanananana. How are you feeling today? In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines dirty, angry, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Everything changed for me when a couple of Americans appeared at my door. They said they wanted to sponsor my channel and handed me military-grade explosives. Can you believe it? Military-grade. The lights will be incredible going forward. With this help, my videos will be next level. I just hope they are as they say, and this isn't some kind of trick. I mean, what would there be to gain? Boris says people are simple. Everything comes down to money and power. And Alex tells me ignorance will not save me from trouble. I understand where they are coming from, but I do not like to think that way. There is more to life than a cruel of superficial goods, hatred, and destruction. Anyway, I do not like where this video is going, so I will see you on the explosives field. Boom, boom, boom. Salute.